For my cultural interview, I had the pleasure of interviewing my very own husband, Zach Siebert. Zachary was born in 1998, and being born in 98 makes him a zillennial, or like a Gen Z millennial, per the internet. Zachary was born in Spearfish, South Dakota, although he lived most of his life in Wright, Wyoming. We did do this interview face to face in our home. During our interview, I used many active listening skills, including my body language and eye contact. I was made sure to be facing him upright and only looking over to jot down notes so that he had my full attention during that time. I also made sure that I was asking for a lot of clarifying information regarding his family history and many of the different stories that he told. Finally, and I would say some of the most important were patience and empathy. I had him take his time, as speaking about his youth can be difficult, as he did lose his mom during that time. Zach's life does fit into American society. Although many of his traditions have German ties, growing up in a rural town definitely shaped him into the man that he is today. During our interview, we spoke about a couple different things, including what it was like to grow up in a small town and the positives of that. That we did speak about his German heritage and some of the traditions that they used, one of which you can see to the left here, which he did not speak very fondly of. Pickled beet and herring salad. I just can't even imagine what that would be like. We also spoke about some of his morals, piggybacking on that small town Wyoming. Very kindness based, strong morals, hardworking, doing what's right, and always looking out for your neighbor. I was surprised to learn, though, that his family did not practice much religion during his youth, except for his mother, who did reach out to religion in times of stress, and he very often went along with her. One of the biggest things we spoke about during our interview was Zach's heritage. Um, Zach's grandfather was a prisoner of war during World War II until they fled here to America, and you can actually see pictured left his aunts and grandparents on their way here to America during that time. I believe that was a picture taken on a train station. Some of the German heritage that Zach saw growing up with his father and his brothers was things like food and his different little treats and goodies. I know he mentioned it wasn't so much like main courses, but side dishes that tended to show themselves, like the previous slide showed pickled herring. Ugh, still can't get that out of my head. And you can also see the touches of herring through here as well. Zach's German heritage did inspire him to take German language classes, and I know he knows quite a bit that he uses even today on our kids and our dog and things like that. I also found it fascinating that Zach is only a second generation American for his family line, and our kids, of course, would be a third. Life was very family oriented for him growing up. They were really tight knit, close, and always really happy to be together. He talked about that stemming from, the fears of his grandparents during World War II not being able to stay together. The rest of his family just kind of adopted that mindset of being with one another and being present and celebrating life for what it was. A second topic that we talked quite a bit about was his small town living and the way that it affected his life from start to finish, growing up and even now. Living in a small community definitely shaped his morals in a big way. He really is very kind and thoughtful and always looking out for others. He talked about how the smallness of his community, which according to the 2020 census was only about 1,600 people, meant that folks were really close and kind of neighbors helping neighbors, always making sure one another were okay. This even spread into his school setting. He had a pretty small graduating class, and it made it so that educators and could be more than just teachers to students. They were very present in students' lives. They knew more than just their grades. They were there for the ups and downs and helping them navigate life as well. This created a community of really, really close friends and family. Outside of that, he did spend a little bit of time with his mom. I know I touched briefly about that on a few slides back, going to church and um, during times of high stress, actually just reaching out to that, but not in a very devout way as you would think of most church going folk. During our interview, we also spoke about some of the major events that happened during his youth. One of which being, Barack Obama being elected the first African American president, and kind of how that affected his youth and his community. One of the downsides to being in a small community is there is not a lot of diversity, which he could definitely see during Obama's election, where many of the adults around him were unkind or just definitely showing more of their biases during that time, as well as the global financial crisis that we went through as well. That spreadsheet actually shows some of that detriment. And he said, when we were going over that, I know he mentioned that his parents made it sound very scary. Like it was more of a psychological thing for him than actual stress, like, some of our parents would have faced or his parents were facing for the economy. Another big one that happened during his youth was, of course, 9/11. And during that time, Zach was only 3. And although he doesn't remember that day, he does remember when he came across an article for it. And his mom's reaction, even a few years later, being that of not wanting to speak about the subject, it being like a sensitive topic where she didn't really want to talk about it and is very uncomfortable and still very, very fresh for the United States. I think one of the most life altering major events for Zach was COVID-19. During that time, he was working at Menards and they had to implement the mask policy, which many people were very against in our small town. They called it a hoax, they gave him a hard time. But besides that, it also made life really easy. I know we did giggle a little bit about missing it because it was so peaceful. But he talked about that people were just very like get in and get out. He didn't have to deal with as many people coming in and causing problems or being unkind to his staff or to himself. And it was very different living in Wyoming. And when we moved here, he talked about that it was definitely more prevalent when we moved here to Appleton, but that it wasn't a bad thing. It was still that same kind of peace, just people weren't as rude about it in his experience. You can see pictured here at the bottom is actually him and our 2 children masked up in the building for kids, which was definitely a culture shock for us at the time. To conclude my presentation, I'll just go over some of the few key things here of my wonderful Zillennial Zach. Even though he was a second generation American with the Germanic background, he held a lot of very American core beliefs as well as his father, working very hard, long hours, being there for the people around them, being the backbone for their families, and looking out for their communities. I feel like we talked about, outside of the major world events that I listed, things have just been wild since Zach was a kid, and we just kind of keep trucking. He kind of keeps trucking, I should say, always looking towards the positives and moving forward with the hope that everything is going to be okay and life's going to be great and we have family. And I know we also talked about how thankful he was for his education there in Wright, Wyoming. He feels like he was able to get a step up in life and just, you know, he's just all around a pretty swell guy. Well, definitely glad to have him in our family. Thank you.